Moscow was certainly wrong-footed by this. There have been reports that the Ministry of Defence was warned about a build-up in military activity around the Sumy region over the last few months and chose to ignore it.
Last night, we heard from the Ukrainian President Zelensky that Russia should feel what it has done following Ukraine's cross-border incursion. It's now around 4 days since that incursion began. How much ground has Ukraine gained? What evidence do we have of that?
I should probably preface this all by saying that a lot of the information that we have about the operation is largely coming from Russian sources, from the Ministry of Defence and from military bloggers. Ukraine itself is yet to really comment on the situation, other than some of those more oblique statements that you just referenced there from Zelensky. But from what we can piece together, it seems that they have struck fairly deep into Russian territory. Some reports today suggesting that they'd got as far as 20 miles into the border. They also appear to have captured at least part of a town called Suja, which is about 6 miles from the border. And there are also airstrikes onto Russian positions, which are about 30 kilometers in. So it's they appear to be pressing, and despite Russian claims that their army has halted the advance, it would appear that that isn't the case.
Why do you think it is that Ukraine hasn't made any sort of specific statements about what is going on?
I think they don't want to compromise the operation really by talking too much about it. They're waiting to see how it plays out. They don't want to give any succor to Russia's defense by talking about what their intentions are, what their plans are. It's obviously been speculated that this is potentially a tactic designed to try and draw Russian forces from other parts of the front. Ukraine is under huge pressure at the moment in the Donbass, around an area called Pokrovsk in particular. So it's largely thought at the moment that is probably what their tactic is, but obviously they don't want to talk too much about that and help Russia.
This incursion, it's different to previous attempts by Ukraine. Can you elaborate on the scale of this incursion?
Yeah, as you said, there's been a few, I think probably raid would be a better description, since last summer, all of which have been carried out by battalions which are made up of exiled Russians who are under the command of Ukraine's military intelligence. So, for example, there was one earlier this year, about a week before the Russian presidential elections, in which members of the Russian Legion launched an assault on the Belgorod region of Russia and were pretty swiftly repelled. This one is different. It seems to be on a much larger scale. Russia has said that it thinks that about 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers have crossed the border. That figure should be taken with a pinch of salt, but clearly there are a lot of them, and certainly more than during previous incursions. And the fact that Ukraine has been able to occupy these territories, have been able to maintain its position on Russian soil for 4 days now, goes far beyond previous raids of this sort.
And I mean, we've heard concerns about the size of Ukraine's military and also its recruitment process and its struggles with trying to recruit more soldiers. So why do you think it is that Ukraine would launch this sort of incursion?
Yeah, like you said, that there are people who have questioned the value of this, given that there is such a shortage of manpower and hardware on other parts of the front line. So there are those who have criticised the action, saying that it's a waste of resources for ostensibly little gain. But as I said earlier, I think it seems as though this is a move that's designed to get on the front foot and to stop having the terms of the war dictated by Russia, and trying to draw resources from other parts in order that places like Kharkiv, for example, where Russia has been, like Russia launched an offensive in the springtime, will ease the pressure on those sorts of areas, and apart from anything else, also provides a pretty significant morale boost to the nation. It's all anyone is talking about here, and I think people feel that they've been under Russian occupation, Russian attack for the last 10 years, and this is giving Russians a taste of their own medicine.
Russia's declared a federal state of emergency in the Kursk region. What does this involve, and how has Russia responded?
They've started evacuating some of the villages along the border. The region's governor has called for blood donations. They're moving in. Putin today, just a couple of hours ago, announced that he was moving reinforcements into the area. So all the sorts of things that you would imagine, really. I mean, they're not. I think it's highly unlikely that they would just cede this territory. It seems that their strategy here is to push the Ukrainians back to the border.
And also in terms of how Russia has responded in Ukraine, you mentioned in your article about glide bombs. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, Russia's hit back very hard. I was in the Sumy region yesterday, in the villages next to the border, and they've been dropping glide bombs pretty much every day in every village over the past 48 hours. And I think it was 56 that they dropped in the course of one day, which is far and away a record for that region, which hitherto has been relatively calm. So they've retaliated very strongly, but only today there was a report that Ukraine had destroyed an airbase quite deep into Russia, which apparently was a weapons store for about 700 glide bombs. So that could be something that's related to the fact that Russia's been trying to hit them so hard with glide bombs in response to this.
And you mentioned how this has sort of been a morale boost for Ukrainians. Can you gauge your feel about how this incursion's impacted Moscow, the Kremlin, and also Russian citizens?
I think it's fair to say that Moscow was certainly wrong-footed by this. There have been reports that the Ministry of Defense was warned about a build-up in military activity around the Sumy region over the last few months and chose to ignore it. And this is the first big test, really, for Russia's new Minister of Defense, Belousov, who replaced Sergei Shoigu a couple of months ago. And he's come under heavy criticism for it by military bloggers who are very influential in Russia and have essentially criticized both the head of the army and the head of the Ministry of Defense for having not foreseen this and then initially tried to play down the extent of the incursion, which they quite swiftly had to then backtrack on when it became clear that this was quite significant.
And we heard that Russia accused Britain of being behind this incursion in some capacity. Firstly, what do you make of that accusation? And do you see this incursion having any impact on the Western allies and NATO?
The West has denied any prior knowledge of this. I think I spoke to an MP earlier called Salome Bobrovska, who said that she wished these sorts of attacks had happened earlier, but what had stopped them was the fact that the West had placed restrictions on Ukraine and stopped them from doing it. And in this instance, again, the White House said that they had no prior knowledge of it, but equally they haven't said that the attacks contravened any of those restrictions. So it seems as though that the West has responded in a fairly, albeit not supportive way, has not, at least publicly, sought to sanction Ukraine over this.
How do you see this incursion progressing?
There's not a huge amount of information coming out about this, and that which we do know is largely coming from open source materials and from military bloggers, and in small part from the Russian Ministry of Defense as well. So the situation remains unclear, but it's also very fluid as well. And each day it seems to be the case that Ukrainians are advancing further and further into Russian territory. There's been some suggestion that they will seek to target the nuclear power plant, which is one of the biggest nuclear power plants in all of Russia, which I would suggest perhaps is a little far-fetched, given that it's about 55 miles inside the border. But again, equally not impossible, given that they've managed to make it 20 miles already within the space of 4 days.